What does it all mean? It's almost like where I am now is with this new information, once I fully understand it, what am I going to be capable of? Because I've achieved a lot. How much more can I achieve now that I know why my brain works the way that it does? And once I've found out some cheat codes, I call them cheat codes, but just tools, there's a big part of me that's excited about what the second part of my life, the second half, will look like. What a beautiful day. I wanted to speak about late diagnosis. And when I say late diagnosis, I mean being diagnosed in adult life with ADHD and or autism. And in my case, it turns out that it's both, which I'm beginning to learn is quite common. Yeah, but it's a weird one. So I've always thought that I don't quite fit in, and I'm not quite like anyone else. I guess when I was growing up, it would be, you're a bit weird. I reframe that as unique. And I was one of those child into adult, that was able to fit in with every different type of group or person. And I guess what I learned now is that was me masking. But I guess if it's something that you've been doing your whole life, now, being 44, it's hard to know whether I'm masking or not. So I'm trying to acknowledge every little kind of thing that crops up in order to then start to think about, is this ADHD? Is this autism? Or is this just my personality? When I decided to get assessed for ADHD and autism, I'd actually thought that if I was going to be neurodiverse in any way, I believed that it would be with autistic traits. I'm high functioning, at least I like to think I am. I've held very senior positions in growing companies, but I've always, in terms of the reason why I thought that I would be, that if I was going to have any neurodiversity, then it would be autism, is because I've always really liked routine and structure, and when that changes at the last minute, I really, really can't cope with that. Now, being an adult now, I have coping strategies that I use, because life can be unpredictable. So I've certainly learned how to deal with that, certainly in like working life. But I think what I'm beginning to understand now is that to what cost, or at what cost. So you cope with things as a neurodiverse person, but yeah, at what cost versus someone who is neurotypical? And that's the answer I don't know at the moment. But yeah, so when I was putting myself forward for these assessments, because I didn't need to, it was very much because I've always been keen to understand myself, understand why I do the things that I do, understand why I behave the way that I do, understand what motivates me, etc., etc. Just this unrelenting pursuit of wanting to know myself. And obviously as we get older, we change and we evolve. And I've always been, and I still am, keen to be the best version of myself. And that's being the best version of yourself, that is I believe, a work in progress. If you think that you're the finished article, as a human being, that's obviously your prerogative, but I'm always like, what else is there? It comes back to what I've said previously about kind of like the 1% or the 0.1% improvements every day. And so I decided to get myself assessed so that I could know whether I had neurodiversity as part of the mix, or whether I was just a bit of a tricky person, or as I like to say, an arse. Although probably the most self-aware arse there ever was. And then when I went to see the GP, they were very much more. It was very much more. They felt that what I was describing was more ADHD related, and I'd learnt about the right to choose pathway, and getting assessed for ADHD was going to come sooner than getting assessed for autism. The ADHD assessment came through first. Wasn't really sure what to expect. Yeah, it's a 2-part assessment. So you have your part A, and then you have your part B, and then someone that's known you from being a child, maybe your parents or carer or whatever your situation is, they would then fill out a questionnaire or accompany you to the appointment. And yeah, the long and short of it was that after the second assessment, I was diagnosed with ADHD combined, so both inattentive and hyperactivity, which I was quite surprised at. I'm not a hyperactive person in the physical sense, but then when you start to analyse and look at why I've come to that conclusion, I then think about, well, I walk an obscene amount every day. I train consistently throughout the week. I then do additional things like running and whatnot. And I realise that's maybe helped to curb my hyperactiveness. Or maybe that's just not a strong part of the ADHD. And it's more about the bouncing thoughts, overthinking everything to the nth degree. It's pretty mad, and that's something that I've always done. And yeah, so I was surprised at that, and then that kind of made me hungry for wanting to get the autism assessment underway. So I chased that up, and then that came through. And yeah, first assessment was due to be for 90 minutes, and I think it was about 3 hours. I was just going on and 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 on. And one thing really sticks out with me in that assessment is they asked me whether I take things literally, and I immediately said no. And then they gave me an example of, if somebody says to me, we're going to go in 5 minutes, what do you do if it's 20 minutes or 15 minutes? Well, I completely can't cope. If you say 5 minutes, then I'm there timing whether it's 5 minutes or not, or I'll set a timer. If you say I'm just going to do this, I'll expect it to be happening in the next breath or the next step. And it just made me laugh, because I was adamant that I wasn't someone who took things literally. And then you start to think of all these examples, I'm like, oh my, I actually take things very, very literally. As I've already said about, I like routine and structure. It's not that my routine can't change, it's not that my structure can't change, it's not that I can't cope with things being different. I just need to know about them in advance so that I can have time to work them through in my mind, and then I'm pretty cool. But then you get this kind of conflict between ADHD and autism, which is, I like the idea of being spontaneous, but only if I know absolutely everything that is going to happen in that spontaneous moment. Therefore, that is a conflicting statement, but it's one that I've lived with forever. And it can be to do with anything, like food. I'm not good at sharing food because I don't know how much I can have of what's on offer. I like to know what I've got, And if I do get in a situation where I'm sharing, I wait for everyone else to go and then I will have what I need to have. Or if if you're in a situation, I don't know, Sunday lunch or whatever, I just take a small amount, and then people look at you and they will say, why, you can take more. And I'm like, no, it's fine. And it's just, these little things that now are kind of cropping up. And I'm also someone that, when I've made a decision about something, it takes a great deal of reflection for me to change that stance. And I wasn't aware it was my neurodiversity at play. I think back and, wonder, would I have made different decisions had I known about my neurodiversity, for example, through my childhood, through my teenage years, through my early adulthood. And maybe I would. I guess we'll never know. And so now I'm very much trying to focus on the future whilst making sense of the past. And it's very confusing. I can have days where I have lots of clarity of thought, and then other days where I then have self-doubt, I then question what I landed on before. And it's really, I really don't know what to make of it. But I did just want to kind of just jump on and talk a little bit as someone who's been diagnosed, in midlife, 44. What does it all mean? It's almost like where I am now is, with this new information, once I fully understand it, what am I going to be capable of? Because I've achieved a lot. How much more can I achieve now that I know why my brain works the way that it does? And once I've found out some cheat codes, I call them cheat codes, but just tools, there's a big part of me that's excited about what the second part of my life, the second half, will look like. So there's a bit of sadness as to what's gone before, the unknown, but there's excitement about what's to come and where I've managed to get without these key bits of information. I think where I wanted to finish is, I don't like labels. In fact, I hate labels. I've always avoided them, because people then, if you're labelled, they can then put you into a box. And so I've got this conflict with myself around whether I am openly, both in a professional and personal sense, whether I'm very open about my neurodiversity or whether I just keep it to myself, except for my close circle or those that I choose to tell. Because I do think that there's still a lack of understanding around neurodiversity. I'm one of those people that doesn't fully understand it, and therefore people can treat you a certain way because they don't understand it themselves. But I guess the biggest thing is the not knowing, or even the knowing, doesn't make me any less capable than I was. I actually think that knowing now is going to make me even more capable, which again comes back to that excitement piece. But it's if you decide to be open about your neurodiversity, how do you convey that I'm someone who lost my job, so how do I convey that in a way that isn't going to be viewed negatively? And that's something that I haven't figured out yet. But I've got time. I've got time to figure that out, thankfully. And I guess the other thing is, I think when I was going through the idea of being assessed, gone through the process of being assessed, and it's not traumatic, but it's quite, you have to dig deep. You have to really think and assess and question. And that's where I've landed right now, as of today. But it was just in my head, so I wanted to share it. I hope that if you're someone going through the same thing, you're not alone, and I hope this is in some way helpful. Obviously, if you're further along in your journey, or if you've got a bit more clarity than I have, please do share. I'd love to where you've landed and what you're doing to progress with your life. Have a good day. I'm sure we'll talk more.